So this blog is Hope for the Future, but this one for the moment contains an element of science fiction, and that is it's really addressing the holy grail of actually reversing or stopping some of the mechanisms of aging. But even if you have the healthiest diet, the best genetics, and the best lifestyle, over time, approaching 100 to 120, currently the prospects are that we will decline and die. And if you look at a 100-year-old, even with the best lifestyle in the world, they will still look 100 years old. So this Hope for the Future blog is what is actually being done in science, not by hearsay, but in science, to try and stop and reverse aging. Now, there's one thing that I want to say, that this is a huge subject area and it's a very controversial area as well. So there are lots of grey areas, so I'm going to put at the bottom of this blog links so that you can read further. So all I'm conveying at the moment is what's been published or in book form or in papers so far. But it is a controversial area, it's a new area, and it's a big area as well. But that's what science is all about progress. So just a very quick recap. All these diseases, most diseases that kill us in the West today, heart disease, atherosclerosis, dementia, even autoimmune diseases like rheumatoid arthritis, they are all diseases of aging. They cannot be separated from aging. They're entwined with aging, and therein lies the problem.
Here's a cheerful graph you don't see very often. What it shows is that your risk of dying in a given year doubles every 8 years. So, for example, when you're 10 years old, you've got a 1 in 10,000 chance of dying in that year. But by the time you're 40, it's a 1 in 800 chance of dying in that year. And by the time you reach 80, it's a 1 in 20 chance of dying in that year. So what we're really after here is to find ways to slow the accumulation of age-related damage.
But there are a few people who have come in from the sidelines over the last 15 years who have sort of rattled gerontology up a bit. And because it's such a big field, I can only really talk about one of these at the moment, one of these people in particular, although I will extend it to other people in later blogs. And one of these scientific figures who's come in recently in the last 15 years is called Aubrey de Grey. I'll give you the link to his book and his research. And he's come along, he's a very controversial figure for a couple of reasons. I'll explain a bit about him. Visually, he's quite an individual. He's got a big bushy beard, almost like he probably won't like this, but he looks a bit like a Jesus figure. And so I think it backs up straight away in some areas of the community, second in the scientific community. And secondly, he can come across as quite short. He's highly intelligent, but he can come across as quite short and quite arrogant. So he's not to everyone's taste. And thirdly, I suppose what other scientists don't like is he didn't originally train as a biologist or a medic. He was originally a computer scientist, and he swapped to work on gerontology. But anyway, he's quite a controversial figure, so you get the message. But for what it's worth, I like him. I think he's great. And I tell you why I like him. It's because everyone, or most people, working in their small little fields, but he has come along and said, look, you have to treat the causes of aging before you can treat all these other diseases that are caused by aging. If you don't address aging, you won't be able to cure any of these diseases. Or if you do, you can cure dementia and then a heart attack will come along. Or you can cure heart attacks, but then dementia or stroke will come along. So they're all entwined together. So you need to address the root cause of aging. And Aubrey de Grey has set up this institute called the SENS Foundation, which is what he calls Strategies for Engineering Negligible Senescence, SENS. So basically to halt and reverse aging. So really, people have started to take him more seriously over the last 15 years. Not just because he wanted to address aging per se was that he actually came up with a strategy of how to do it, a theoretical strategy. And basically that strategy is based around 7 fundamental pillars. And it's these 7 things that eventually kill us all. And so I've mentioned these previously, but I think it's worth going through each one. There are 7 of them. So you can skip to the end if it's a bit too much, but I'll go through them just for the sake of completeness. And it's interesting. So the first one, the first of these things that we can address is mutations. And what is meant by that is that over time we get mutations in our chromosomes, in our DNA, that can lead to cancer. So that is the first one, and that can kill us. So if we can interrupt that, it goes part of the way to making us live. The second pillar, or second classification, were mutations in mitochondria. I just said mitochondria, these little energetic powerhouses that are in our every cell, most cells in our body, and there can be hundreds, thousands of these in an individual cell, and they really convert energy into a usable form that we can use to live. And you can get mutations in these over time. And it's believed that mutations in this mitochondrial DNA also has an effect on aging. The third category are so-called intracellular aggregates. It's a big name for what it means is junk within our cells. And what happens is that over our lives or over time, there are some products of metabolism that the cells find really difficult to break up. And they accumulate in cells and make them work less efficiently. And it's believed that this build-up has an involvement in atherosclerosis, macular degeneration, and neurological diseases. Fourthly, we've got extracellular aggregates. That is the junk that doesn't build up inside cells, that builds up outside of the cell. And these can be, one example of amyloid proteins, and they've been sort of associated with Alzheimer's disease. And number 5 is that over time we lose cells. That's cells are not replaced, and some organs, for example, the liver, the heart, the brain, actually loses cells over time. So cell loss has a big impact. But ironically, it can go the other way too. We can have too many cells. A good example is this, cancer growths. So it's linked to chromosome damage as well. But you get uninhibited growth of cells, and they grow into tumours, and that is cancer. And lastly, we have something called extracellular protein crosslinks. And what this really means is that you become stiffer, your organs become stiffer, and the connections between cells become more stiff. And this happens because some proteins in our bodies crosslink, they start linking together. When you get too many of these crosslinks, the organ basically becomes less flexible, and the whole body becomes less flexible and makes it work again less efficiently. And this can be one of the problems why blood pressure's a problem when you get older, because the arteries can't expand anymore. Now, they were the 7 categories, and again, they are controversial. Not everyone agrees with this in the world of gerontology, but the reason why I like this idea and why I'm a big fan of it, for what it's worth, is just that it's the only approach we've got. And when you start breaking it down into these components, you can start to address each component, and that is exactly what's happening. But one of the other criticisms that has so far come out of this is that up to now, up to date, nothing has been shown, none of these approaches have yet been shown to extend lifespan. So that is a valid criticism. At the moment, if you want to take a therapy to reverse aging, there's nothing available. But consequently, the good news is that in every single one of those categories that we've just talked about, the mitochondria, the cross-linking, the chromosome damage, there's a huge amount of research. So if every one of those steps, in theory, can be repaired or upregulated, then the prospect for finding the holy grail of life extension becomes more real. And just to put it in perspective, this chap, Aubrey de Grey, he sort of predicts that the first person alive today may have been born already who will hit 1,000 years old. I mean, you know, making predictions like that is all very well. It is when the papers start coming through and the research comes through, that's when I'll sit up and notice. So, in summary, this hope for the future. The reason why it's exciting is that a lot of research effort is really going on now for each of these categories. The downside is that there isn't a therapy as yet that will increase lifespan in humans. So, as I've said before, this, to a certain extent, I think, I would put it's real science. The science is really happening, but in terms of the therapies, it's still science fiction. So the only thing that we can do at the moment, and the point of all these blogs, as I said before, is to live healthily, to extend your maximum healthy lifespan for as long as possible until some of these life-extending therapies come along, if they do. And if they don't, then at least you've led a long and healthy lifespan. But what I certainly don't do is stay awake at night waiting for the immortality therapy to come along. No. And what I've just given is a very broad summary of one of the possible strategies that are addressing this hope for the future, this end of aging, if it happens. And there is a very important consideration here. If people start living forever, or even double the amount or triple the amount, it has huge connotations for demographics, for how the number of people in the world and consumption and all those huge issues. So they're all going to have to be addressed. There are two sides to every coin here. But as I said, for now, it's still science fiction. So if anything, any new information comes out in the research, I'll post it up if it's interesting. So all the blogs that will follow from now on will be addressing short components. There'll be shorter subject areas like high intensity training, or is weight training bad for your joints or good for your joints, or which fats are good for you or bad for you. So there'll be small topics now from now on. And the next blog is all about high intensity training, or high intensity interval training. There's some really good new evidence that's been coming out just for the last few years about how a small amount of high intensity training can really have a good impact on some of the markers of longevity. So that's what will come next.